Hello and welcome to Be the Data Security Hero Your Company Needs. Today's conversational webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and Netapp in partnership with Enterprise Strategy Group and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your host for this special event. Now, before we get to this timely discussion, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you. So we encourage any questions and comments in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Several of you have already typed in your hellos, which we love to see. There's also, that's also the place to let us know if you need any technical assistance that a browser refresh won't fix. Now, we won't have an opportunity for Q&A after the panel discussion today, but if you do have questions for the panelists, we'll be sure to share those questions with Rubrik and Netapp. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There's a PDF on zero trust data security from Rubrik related to ransomware. There's a PDF from Rubrik and Netapp about how they're better together for data security in the cloud. And then I'd really like to call out something different and fun among the resources. It's a Rubrik and Netapp comic book produced by the team here at Actual Tech Media. So we hope you'll check out that PDF. Also in the handout section are links to Actual Tech Media's Guerrilla Guide Book Club, which gives you access to great printed resources on technology topics, and a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming webinars. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Again, just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with that, let's get to today's informative discussion between Vinny, PF, and Chris. I'll turn things over to Vinny for introductions and to get us.
Welcome to this webinar by ESG, called Overcoming Cybersecurity Challenges in the Face of Relentless Data Growth. I'm Vinny Chawinski, a senior analyst with ESG. I'm joined today by PF from Rubrik and Chris from Netapp. PF, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Rubrik?
Sure. Hi, Vinny. So I am a field CTO at Rubrik. I've been with Rubrik for almost 4 years now, in just a few days. I specialize in everything that we do with our strategic alliance partners, such as Netapp. I've actually been working with Netapp for close to 3 years now. And in my role, I mostly do two different things. So on one hand, I do a lot of evangelism, like, speaking at conferences and being a spokesperson for the company. And on the other hand, I'm helping as a specialist our account teams to, go win more new customers.
Great. And Chris?
Good morning, Vinny. Yes, so Chris Mano from Netapp. I've been here for 17 years. I have the honor of leading what we call a solutions architect team here in North America. The solutions architects are specialists that focus on different solution sets. So under my team, I have data protection specialists, security specialists, storage management specialists, things like that. And basically, they help the customer understand how those technologies will interact with Netapp technologies.
Sounds perfect. Today, we're going to chat about how the influx of data is shifting how organizations and businesses approach data security. We're also going to talk a little bit about risk mitigation strategies and the ones that help ease the impact of potential breaches. Thanks for joining us today, and let's get started. In recent ESG survey, we asked IT security professionals what they thought about the current cyber risk, and 82% of them said they believe that cyber risk has increased over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, this puts additional burden on data protection specialists who, as we all know, have their hands full already protecting corporate data. So I thought this might be a great place to talk about the general overview from both Rubrik and Netapp on your philosophy on data security and protection, and how it's evolved to handle changes and challenges like cyber recovery. Maybe PF, you might want to start here?
Sure. Yeah. So if I'm just taking a step back to give a little bit of context when you think about cyber threats as it is nowadays, the one thing that they always target is the victim's data, right? And the main reason behind that is that I think data has become the lifeblood of pretty much any business. And they know it, and they want to, kind of take hostage that data so that they can get money out of it. And so whether it's by, I don't know, maybe locking it down or encrypting it, or by deleting it altogether, or maybe, and actually quite often by exfiltrating it as well. And so, when any organization is facing such a situation, the ultimate goal will always be to recover the data that has been harmed, or at least one of them. But that would be actually the final step. And to get that to get to that final step, well, actually, in the first place, they must ensure that they have protected the data, and they have like multiple copies of the data in probably different locations, and managed by different technologies as well. Who knows what may happen? And of course, on top of that, more and more, there is a need for having not only backups, but like really immutable backups, backups that cannot be actually a victim as well of such a cyber threat, so that it will be utilizable if need be. But it's much more than just having immutable backups to make sure that they will be able to get to that final step, which is recovering the data. Actually, the platform itself must be quite highly secured, just to make sure that nobody can get in, nobody can change any setting, for example, I don't know, to change the retention and decrease it so that data would expire and would be deleted. That's also something that we tend to overlook sometimes, but that can happen. We of course need to make sure that only the right persons can access the platform with only the right permissions, the right privileges, so that they can do their job and no more. We also need to secure these logins by providing, for example, multi-factor authentication and things like that. So there's a lot to think about before getting into that final step of recovering the data. And that's actually what we tend to provide. And I'm sure that Chris will tell similar stories where Netapp is also providing a lot of different solutions to actually achieve the same goals, which is basically protecting our customers' data.
Perfect lead in. Chris, do you want to add to that or elaborate on?
Yeah, just a couple of little add-ins. I mean, PF was right on the nose with a lot of his points, right? So, but to his point, remediation is almost the last step, right? So a couple of things. When you get to that last step, you want to make sure that you have data that can be restored and is viable, right? So you don't want to get to your, I tell a lot of people their backups, sometimes it's a false sense of security because they just accept that the backup is going to be actually a good copy to restore from. In the days of tape technology, maybe that was, even that was a false sense of security, right? Because you don't know once the data goes on the tape. I have a tape automation background. You don't know when you go to get to the tape, how old it is, what happened to it, what kind of environment was it stored in. So again, it's kind of a false sense of security. People always like, well, it's on tape, I could always get it back. But Netapp goes, way before, like PF said, way before remediation. There's a lot of other things you need to do, right? So you need to identify the data in your system. One of the things that I've gone through even before ransomware and all the security concerns is just around data protection. People don't like to classify or identify their data, right? It's because it's hard, right? So one of the things that we try to do is help people classify or even identify the types of data that actually are being stored in the system to make sure they do have the appropriate protection, right, for that types of data. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I would add to that that data classification need is even more important with cyber threats and especially ransomware, because when you think about what victims need to do when they get hit by a ransomware attack, for example, as part of what they need to do, they need to actually notify and report to some regulators, whoever they may be, depending on the country where they are and the protocol and things like that. But that's actually a legal obligation. And especially when data has leaked, which must be assumed, unfortunately. And if you fail to comply with this, if you fail to do this, well, not only you will actually be the victim of that cyber attack, but on top of that, you will get into a situation where you're not only that victim, but you're also the culprit for not being able to notify the regulator, and then you may be fined. So yeah, that data classification is something that it's not only extremely relevant, but kind of mandatory in my opinion.
Yes, you guys seem to be in sync, and that makes a lot of sense. So, and now we're focusing a lot on ransomware attacks, and might as well set the stage here. Our research finds that the majority of organizations we surveyed said they've had a ransomware attack within the last 12 months. I think a little more concerning to me is that 21% of the same people in that survey said they experience attacks on a weekly or daily basis. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing the same frequency from the field or from your customers. What are they saying about how often or how prevalent this is?
Yeah, so I would say that there are two different things to consider here. Of course, there is the company that is a victim's visibility, like on the market, how visible they are, because probably the more visible they are, the most likely they will get attacked, and the more frequent they will be attacked. And on the other hand, it's also a matter of vertical. Like, for example, if I just take an example, healthcare, like hospitals, for instance, they tend to get attacked much more frequently than other types of organizations. So yeah, unfortunately, that's definitely something that we also see. It's very frequent, depending again on a few things, but there's not a single week where we don't hear or read some news stories of cyber attacks in the field. So yeah.
So lining up with our research, and Chris, what are you guys seeing at Netapp?
Yeah, I mean, not shocked at that number, Vinny. I would actually think the number is probably higher. Like PF said, right? They're legally obligated to tell people about any breach, but they're not proud of it, right? So they don't go banging pots and pans to tell everybody. They report it like they have to, but they don't like to tell people, right, that they have been breached, right? Even
of course not. Yeah.
Yeah. When we talk about internally, every company knows about something that's happened with one of their customers, and we keep their names quiet, right? Because obviously they're not proud that this happened. Not to their fault. These people that are performing these attacks are getting more sophisticated on a day-by-day basis. That's another thing we talk about, right? So that number might also seem low because there's a lot of people that don't even know that they've been breached, right? So we call it, once you have to identify you've actually been breached, they actually sit in some of these environments for months now, right? Before they actually unleash anything, because like PF said before, one of the things they do sometimes is they don't go right after the data. They actually go and they start disabling all the mechanisms for recovery. Because once those have all been exhausted, now the person only has that choice either of paying the ransom or losing the data, right? So again, these bad actors are just getting more and more sophisticated, and a lot of times people don't know that they've been infiltrated, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Chris. And one of the other pieces of the same data that we've seen is that a lot of times soft targets will get hit again and again. So people need to harden their infrastructure and their solutions. So not only is it pretty high frequency, but oftentimes the customers or the same people are hit multiple times. Ransomware obviously represents a negative impact. A ransomware downtime represents a negative impact to the business and customers. And our research shows that the effects of downtime manifest in several ways. And oftentimes we think revenue right up front, but it also impacts operational efficiency, employee morale, customer confidence. Now, you'd probably say that eventually the impact on these elements individually will lead to decreased downtime. So, but it's spread across, the impact is spread across the business. It's not just, we're losing money because we're down, but when you come back, customer confidence can slip, So maybe you can tell us about a little bit about the Rubrik and Netapp partnership and how it can help customers avoid these negative impacts. Maybe start with PF again.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there's a few things that can be considered to try and address this, but at a high level, I think that in general, you're always better when you partner with someone that you trust and that you can work well with, rather than trying to do everything on your own, just on your own. And that's what we've been doing with Netapp over the past 3 years or so. And it's not only about, technology integrations, which we have, of course, because, we're talking about trying to build a response to some cyber threats and to cyber incidents, which we do together. But much more than just the technology points, that partnership that we have actually has started in the field. So like I was saying, it's always better when you can partner with someone that you can actually get along with well, and that's historically what has happened with Netapp, and of course beyond that helped also develop that partnership, which then led into these technology integrations that we brought together, which really helped address some of the issues and especially I'm thinking about performance. So like in terms of reducing the downtime, if you've got solid solutions, reliable solutions that can perform really well, not only in terms of backup, but especially in terms of recovery, then of course it will help reduce that downtime and then maybe decrease the revenue losses. So yeah, I don't know, Chris, if there's anything that you want to add to that.
PF, the biggest thing I will hit on, and again, I've been here in Netapp for 17 years, so I've seen things work and I've seen things not work. The big difference with the relationship between the two companies, like PF said, it actually started in the field, right? So what I mean by that is the sales teams getting along with each other, the back end organizations getting along with each other. And then yes, what actually wound up happening is, yes, we have CEO to CEO relationship now, right? Where they actually get together, have lunch, dinners, that type of thing. But if it's done the other way, and I've seen this over the course of my years here, it doesn't necessarily flow downhill, right? So you could have a relationship that's based at the CEO level. And if the two sales teams and organizations don't trust each other, like PF was saying, it doesn't matter what relationship was forged up top. What we notice, right, when we go into accounts, right, is, we want the best solution for the customer, right? So at the end of the day, right, which technologies, and it could be selections from each one of our technologies, right? So it's not an or, it's probably an and it's going to be, certain pieces from each company. Right. But at the end of the day, this is why it's important that the sales teams get along with each other. It might not always be, Rubrik's technology for the piece of it or the Netapp technology for the piece of it. It's both of us together, and that the account teams are working and agreeing. I've seen too many times the door shuts and the other account team is whispering in the customer's ear that they should go. We don't have any. We have not had that between the two companies, knock on wood.
Well, field synergy definitely is a key element, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and actually there's one thing that I would like to add to that. In terms of the partnerships are itself, there's one thing that in my opinion really helped, which is that when you think about Netapp's strategy and then Rubrik's strategy, well, of course we don't do the same things, right? But we have the same kind of philosophy and same kind of strategy, and that helped a lot. Like, one thing that Netapp has been working on really hard over the past years is to make sure that their customers have freedom of choice when it comes to putting their data somewhere and managing it. They've really made a lot of things, whether from a technological perspective or others, to make sure that they've got this freedom of choice. And it's actually the same kind of philosophy that we have at Rubrik. No matter where customers want to have their data, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's in their own data centers, whether they want to move that between different environments, from a data protection and security perspective, it shouldn't bring more complexity. We also want our customers to have that freedom of choice and to keep that freedom of choice, and not to have to change everything when they start migrating, for example, workloads to the cloud. And that's something that we've been doing together really, really well.
It makes a lot of sense. You both hit on data and, having flexibility in your data selections, but, let's talk a little bit about data growth. It represents a significant challenge to almost all of IT, but I think, probably hits data protection a little harder than everywhere else because they have to deal with retentions, they have to deal with multiple copies. ESG research shows that 67% of the respondents say their backup data is growing between 21 to more than 50% annually. That's a pretty significant jump in data every year. So I can see that impacting and making it challenging for data protection and security professionals and teams. So this probably, maybe goes in Chris's direction a little bit, but what storage elements do you think are critical for a business to have in these types of solutions to enable, fast, as PF just talked about, scale and enterprise scale and needing to recover fast, agile and flexible recoveries?
So I always tell everybody, right? So data is never going to get less, right? The only time data would decrease is if your business was in trouble, right? So, for a healthy business, that amount of data is always going to go up. So I always tell people, there's only two ways of protecting a certain amount of data, right? So you have so much time to protect your data, that amount of data is going up. So you either can move data faster, that's one option, or you can move less data or be more intelligent about what data is actually moved, right? So we have gone past the option of moving data faster, right? Like, so if you look back at history, for every, let's say, we'll stay with LTOs, but with every LTO and tape drive generation, we got faster and faster and faster. And then it put the onus back on the disk, or the source that it was streaming it from. So we've gotten past, how many servers do we need to do that? So we're more in the realm now of moving less data or intelligently moving the data, right? So identification of what's changed is you have to have it, right? There's no way around it. That is one of the reasons why we've partnered with Rubrik, right? They're forever forward. Incremental technology is key. They've actually integrated with some of our APIs in order to enable that. But that portion of it, being able to only identify and actually protect what hasn't been protected already is key in the whole solution, right? Whoever's solution actually would come in, right? And I'll also hit back on identification of the data, right? All data is not created equal, right? So I was, when I was a customer, I was in charge of, protecting data. As that backup administrator, I had no clue the importance of the data because it's application data, right? I'm just protecting it. So the importance or the relevance of the data comes from the application owner, right? They're the only people that can actually tell you how important it is. So identification of the data, not necessarily protecting everything the same way with the same retention. Like I said earlier, people don't like to do that, but if they want, these are some of the things that you need to do if they want to be able to protect the ever-growing amount of data in today's industry.
Yeah, I think you really do have to understand your data and apply the best policies or the best workflows to it. That makes you set me up for this question quite well, Chris. Every year we take a look at SLAs in the data protection space, and they seem to be getting more stringent every year. The last time we looked at this, 57% of respondents said they wanted to be up for their mission critical data within an hour. That if we look to the left of that, 15% of those respondents didn't want any downtime at all. So, what do you think are the most important data security, data protection capabilities a customer needs in their solution to kind of better manage these SLAs? And Chris, you already answered this a little bit. Feel free to elaborate on that with kind of understanding the data and classifying it. But maybe we'll start with PF, and then if you want to chime in on what he says, let's see how that goes.
Yeah, sure. So, when I'm hearing these statistics, I kind of have the feeling that it sounds like we're still thinking. I was going to say it's probably not the right word, but the old-fashioned way. What I mean by that is that when you think about what we used to do in the past in terms of data protection and data recovery, especially thinking and focusing on recovery SLAs, we used to think, well, let's plan for the worst and build a disaster recovery plan, right? That's what we used to do, and we still do, right? But the thing is that when you think about these kind of things, we think about things that usually happen not very often, right? It's quite unlikely to happen, but we need to prepare for it, right? But now if we think about cyber threats, it's much more likely to happen. And the type of recovery that you're, and actually the response plan that you will build for that will be much different than a regular disaster recovery plan as we used to do them. So I think that's quite important to call out, because there's a real difference between disaster recovery and cyber recovery. And for cyber recovery, again, the recovery will be the last step. That's the ultimate goal that we all want to work towards. But the thing is, again, there are multiple steps in between to get there. And I'll just pick an example. But when you start notifying that you have been hit by ransomware, you're a victim, there's a bunch of things that will happen that you don't really have control over. So one of the first things, of course, will be to cut off everything, like all external access, like internet access and that kind of things. But also, there's a chance, again, depending on the regulators in the countries, but there's a chance that somebody comes in to kind of, start maybe some forensics and try to understand what happened, and will instruct the victim not to touch anything. So before you can even think of, well, I want to recover my data that has been harmed, and this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm planning to do to get there, well, I must wait for these people, like a crime scene investigation almost. I must need for these people to finish their job, because before I even start anything in terms of building that recovery plan. So yeah, I think we shouldn't overlook that when we hear this kind of statistics, because again, DR is quite different from cyber recovery, in my opinion.
Sure. And Chris, did you have any points you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example of, like, how, yes, even though we're pretty much lockstep with Rubrik, right, we bring different technologies to bear, right? So one of the advantages Rubrik has is that it's a heterogeneous, I'll call it a play, right? Meaning that no matter whose primary storage you're on, they can provide all the goodness that they do for all of those. Now, with that being said, obviously the certain platforms they have tighter integrations with and can do a little bit more, but for the most part, they can handle a heterogeneous enterprise environment. One of the advantages that we have, right, is that when the data is on Netapp, we can do a lot of things that other people can't do, right? And that quite honestly, right, it's one of the things that brought me to Netapp, and one of the things that keeps me here at Netapp is that I really truly believe in what I've coined is the Netapp data experience. And what I mean by that is we're not just providing somebody storage. We're not just providing somebody NAS shares or LUNs, or it's the minute that your data is in ONTAP is that we actually provide security, we provide data protection, we provide disaster recovery, right? So in the storage operating system, we're a little bit different than just a normal storage company, right? So Vinny, like getting back to RTOs and what a customer's SLA requirements are, we have different technologies within ONTAP for the primary data, right? So this is where we differentiate a little. Like, yes, we talk about remediation, we talk about recovery like PF is doing, but we're doing things to the primary data, right? To actually allow for higher SLAs, or lower SLAs, I should say, not higher, but better SLAs, so that some of those problems might not occur, right? So we're trying to stop it, so necessarily you might not need to remediate. Now, again, ransomware and all this is a whole different story, because there's only so much you could do to try to stop it. I actually attended something where a bunch of CEOs were asked, and they all were like, well, it's probably inevitable that somebody's going to get through. We want to try to stop as much as possible, obviously, but now how do we act? Like PF said, like, how do we act once we've identified it and done all the goodness? Now, how do we recover from that, right? So we want to make sure that that's the fastest and the most rapid that actually can occur. PF, it's not the first time that I've heard, Rubrik and even other companies say they want to actually go and do like an autopsy on, right? Like some forensics on what actually happened, right? But like Netapp actually has technology that we have what we call cloning technology, right? So we have a way of isolating the bad data and keeping it off to the side and allowing the customer to come back up in a more rapid fashion, and then keeping that corrupted data off to the side so that forensics could actually happen, right? So again, we believe in partnerships because we believe in there's multiple entry points to the bad actors coming in. There are things that we can't protect against, right? So for example, we don't offer endpoint security. We don't do that as a company. We don't offer server security, right? We don't do that. Now, once we get down to the data level, yes, that's when Netapp has a lot of things that are actually built into our storage operating system that we can help. But that's why we need these partnerships. We need these partnerships from all the way from, again, any entry point that they could come into, at any way you can actually stop it. And that's the biggest thing that, I don't know if PF sees it, but convincing customers that they are going to need a layered approach, right? Don't necessarily believe, any vendor that comes in and says they have it all covered.
That doesn't sound right.
No. I'm sorry, but no products that, again, these bad actors are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And it's the solution's going to be an and, right? This and this and this, right? It's not going to be an or, right?
So you guys kind of led into my next question and actually covered it a little bit as I was looking through, how I wanted the conversation to go and making sure I didn't miss any points. But, a couple of things you talked about, PF, you talked about old or traditional data protection. Again, ESG is definitely of the mindset that data protection is evolving. It's becoming, intelligent data management. I think, Chris, you hit on a lot of points about classifying data. We think that's critical in data management. We also think that cybersecurity is the next DR, right? If you can't do cybersecurity, your DR plan really goes out the window a little bit, right? So I think you hit on a couple of points there. And my question was kind of talking about SLAs. We started with SLAs and then the SLA gap, because people want to be back up with no downtime at all within an hour. Only 22% hit them. I think you guys covered a lot of the key components of how the solution helps customers, improve their SLAs, improve their success rate. And, I was going to end the next question with storage, data security, and data management all have to work kind of seamlessly. And then ask a little bit about why the combo is so special. You hit on it, and with a lot of key metrics, but is there anything else that you might have left out on this, why the Netapp Rubrik combination is so special and helps customers, meet their SLA objectives that you didn't cover previously?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things here, but one of them, and that's something that we've, I think, both done quite well and been doing quite well over the past years, is to simplify everything, simplify the architecture, simplify the operations. Because when you think about missed SLAs, sometimes you actually realize that it's not only about missed SLAs, it's also as part of that, also workloads that are not well protected or maybe not even protected at all. And sometimes, in probably too often, it's also because the solution in place is way too complicated. So it takes too much time to manage, to monitor, to troubleshoot and all of that. And that doesn't help with meeting the SLAs. But when you start modernizing your infrastructure, whether it's from the production data and production storage perspective or the data protection perspective, and you bring solutions that are super easy to use, that are reliable, that I was going to say almost just work, that's a lot of time that you're going to save. And by saving this time from an IT admin perspective, that means that you can focus on other tasks, which can be making sure that workloads that are not protected or not well protected will be. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, and I'm getting back to technology integrations, which we have between Rubrik and Netapp. Of course, there's a bunch of things that we did together that helps with this, and that helps improve the SLAs both in terms of backup and recovery. And that is what makes that partnership so special, because we've started small in terms of integration. It was mostly, I would say, synergies between the technologies. I'm thinking of, protecting an environment with Rubrik and kind of destaging the long-term retention to StorageGrid, for example, which is, a quite popular use case because it works very well, but it's super easy to implement. And then we got into deeper integrations, such as, for example, we integrated with Netapp SnapDiff and SnapMirror technologies to make sure that, again, we go further into simplifying the IT and making sure that customers have, like, I will say it, one single pane of glass to manage everything, which of course saves time and in management overhead. And actually, we will bring in quite soon even more technology integrations, actually this year, just again to make sure that we can tackle these issues and provide solutions together to our mutual customers.
Makes perfect sense. I think, the last question I wanted to pose to each of you is, do you have any customer success stories or examples that you want to share? I know customers don't want to talk about data loss, but maybe there's something anonymously that you can share with us, or a scenario that you've gone through recently where, someone's been successful in either recovering some part of or all big part of their environment.
Yeah, let me jump here for a second, because I actually do want to add something to the earlier SLA question Vinny had asked, right? So Vinny, one of the things that Netapp notices when we talk to customers, and let's say you're bringing Netapp into the customer's environment for the first time, customers are so used to what did they do prior to Netapp? Well, they ran data protection overnight, right? And why did they run it overnight? They ran it overnight because there was this backup window, right? And what is a backup window? A backup window was created because you didn't want to impact the applications that were running, right? So the window was usually relegated to nighttime, but nowadays, first of all, applications are almost 24/7, right? They're really, that window, there is no ability not to impact the application anymore by running in this backup window. So one of the first things that we have to get our customers used to is that with Netapp technology, right, when your data is sitting on Netapp storage, is that we, first of all, we have the ability to use our snapshot technology, which doesn't put a burden on the application, right? Two, because it's not putting that burden on the application, we could take many, many more recovery points. And if you notice, I didn't call them backups, but many more recovery points during the day. So the first step I always get customers used to is come to our storage, do that once a day because that's what you're used to. But as they start to learn and trust the technology, hey, Mr. Customer, I can give you these recovery points more frequently throughout the day. So in other words, to cut back down on your recovery time of the application data, right? So that helps in those SLAs. When going back to your question, that helps them meet their RPOs. It helps them meet the RTOs, because now once the data is in a snapshot, we can actually restore data with actually not even moving any bits or bytes of data, right? We can actually revert our basically file structure back to points in time to get the customers back and running faster, right? So that's some of the benefits that we have. Now, jumping into some examples, one of the things that, and again, I talk about that false sense of security, and that's why what Rubrik is doing, I'll let PF talk about what Rubrik does, but you want to know that when you go to recover, I always tell people, your quote unquote, your backup copies is your last line of defense, right? So, your primary storage has died. Maybe your disaster, I always joke that DR stands for disaster replication, right? Because if something's corrupt on the primary, you replicate it to the secondary, right? You want to make sure you always need backups because you need those points in time, right? You can't just say, I have replication, so it's good. No, you could have two bad copies of your data, right? So you do need those backups. You do need those points in time. We had a large pharmaceutical customer that when they found that they were corrupt, and they, like PF said, they were still trying to figure out even where the corruption came in. And, first of all, okay, how am I stopping it, right? So they think they recover, and then all of a sudden it went right back to being corrupted again. So they weren't even properly identifying where the corruption was coming in from, right? And they hadn't stopped even that portion of it. So they couldn't get onto the remediation portion of it. But the nice thing about Netapp technology was any of their data that was on Netapp technology, they can actually revert to a snapshot to a point in time. If that, if that was actually still good, they actually went with that one. If it wasn't, so because it could capture the corruption as well, right? But because you're able to take those more frequent recovery points, they were actually able to go all throughout the day and figure out which snapshots they needed in order to bring their data back. Again, depending on the application, they could have been at different points in time, depending on how the corruption spread within their environment. But they had that option because they did have all those different recovery points in time, not just one, right? To lose a whole day sometimes, right? Like I said, were the bad actors in there for a month and corrupting, one of the things I'm even asking now, right, PF, like 30 days of retention, most customers would say that was 90% of all their operational restores that they would do. I think that number has to change now because they're lying and waiting, right? Just in waiting that 30 days now to make sure all the backups have been cycled through or out, so that the customer doesn't have any way to recover from, right?
And give them the ability to stay one step ahead of the bad guys by giving them the agility and flexibility to choose where they restore from, right?
Right. And let me just add, and I'll hand it over to PF. I'll add a term. So PF mentioned immutability. Netapp actually, we've always had immutability in our snapshots, right? You can't overwrite the snapshot by definition, right? Our file system is a write once file system, right? That doesn't mean they can't be deleted, right? So we actually do have another term we actually call indelible, like a Sharpie. We have actually ability to lock our snapshots so that actually not only can't they be changed, they're immutable, they can't be deleted either, right? So tag team those together. And then I know Rubrik has a similar technology where you can have multi-admin, right? We actually have multi-admin authentication now, where, think of it as missile launches for, with multiple keys. We actually have the ability to say, you need 3 people to approve this process in order to get rid of something, right? So, put all, like I said, all this protection is an end. It's not going to be just one thing that solves it. It's going to be things stacked on top of each other.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And actually, we do have similar mechanisms in the platform that we have too, to make sure that not only data is immutable, but it's not because it's immutable, like Chris said, that it cannot be deleted in some ways. And so, of course, we also protect that within our platform. But in terms of customer stories or examples, so I do have a few in mind. Of course, I do have some Netapp and Rubrik customers in mind, but actually these are not the ones that have been a victim of ransomware attacks, probably because they are well protected. But I do have one specific example of a customer that has experienced a ransomware attack last year in February. And this one is really interesting. The thing is, we don't necessarily have a lot of them to talk about, just because, like Chris said earlier, usually they don't want to talk about it. They want anybody to know because of the reputational damage, right? In this case, the customer was transparent enough to actually communicate on what happened, which makes that story really interesting. But to put it simple and actually to cut a long story short, so they were hit by a ransomware attack last year in Feb, and close to 1,000 of their servers were actually locked down and encrypted. The thing is, when this kind of things happen, you don't know exactly what happened. So one of the first things that actually happened in that case is that they kind of built a trust circle, if that makes sense, with only a handful of people. Because since you don't know what happened, you don't know if this attack came from the outside or from the inside. So you cannot trust anybody. So we go back to the zero trust, right, approach. And this actually also creates some collateral damage in terms of, for example, the morale and the trust between the employees within the company. That's also something that is very difficult to manage, and they had to go through this as well. But beyond this, from a technology perspective and data perspective, it's an interesting story as well, because they actually had 3 data protection solutions in place. And actually, they had some reminiscence of some older text that they were still using that had not been migrated to Rubrik yet. And what actually happened and saved them is that the 2 other platforms were actually also hit by the ransomware attack. So these backups and these solutions were totally useless for recovering anything. And Rubrik was the only thing that wasn't touched in the environment. And that's because everything that we've talked about, like immutability, the retention log, the MFA, all of that, they had all of that in place. So Rubrik was totally safe, the data was safe, and they were able to recover, actually, I think more than 800 servers in less than 2 days, so quite quickly. And for the workloads that used to be backed up with the 2 other solutions, they had the good idea to protect these backup servers of these 2 other solutions with Rubrik. And thanks to this, they were able to recover them and do the recoveries of the data with these 2 other solutions that, like I said, were protecting other types of workloads. And so it's a story that ends up happily, because they were able to recover and not to be too much impacted from a business perspective, but that actually accelerated their project to consolidate everything on Rubrik, as you can imagine.
Not to mention, gave you guys some good bragging rights that they're protecting the other backup applications with yours.
True story. And actually, if you're interested, and that's just between us, but I can share the name. There's a nice article on that about that story.
That's a pretty strong testimonial, and so that's about all we have time for today. I think we covered a lot in this webinar. I think we did a nice deep dive into the technical capabilities of the Better Together solution. And I want to thank PF and Chris for being my guests today, and everyone for listening. Thank you. And if you want to learn more, I suggest you check out the attachment section of this webinar for more resources on this topic. Thanks for being with us today.
Okay, and thanks Vinny, PF, and Chris. That was a great discussion. Finally, it's time for our $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Ashley Aldridge from North Carolina. Congratulations to Ashley. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik, Netapp, and ESG for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.